Welcome again to Story Times with Someone Else's Mom. With me, Someone Else's Mom. Today, we're on Chapter 4 of Edward Eager's classic, Half Magic. Like Chapter 3, it's a bit on the long side. Hello. So today, we're going to split the chapter in half, so you can take it in 2 doses instead of one long one. Let's find out what happened to Katherine. Next morning, there were no secret meetings before breakfast. Jane stayed in her room, and Mark stayed in his room, and in the room they shared, Katherine and Martha hardly conversed at all. Each of the children was too busy making private plans and deciding on favorite wishes. Breakfast was eaten in silence, but not without the exchange of some excited looks. The children's mother was aware that something was in the air and wondered what new trial lay in store for her. When their mother had gone to work, and the dishes and other loathly tasks were done, the 4 children gathered in Katherine and Martha's room. Katherine had already checked to see that the charm still lay in its cubbyhole, unharmed by wish of mouse or termite. Jane had drawn up some rules. "The wishes are to go by turns," she said. "Nobody's to make any main wish that doesn't include all the rest of us. If there have to be any smaller wishes later on in the same adventure, the person who wished the main wish gets to make them, except in case of emergency, like if he loses the charm and one of the other ones finds it. I get to go first." Katherine had something to say about that. "I don't see why," she said. "You always get dibs on first because you're the oldest, and grown-ups always pick Martha because she's the baby, and Mark has a wonderful double life with all this and being a boy too. Middle ones never get any privileges at all. Besides, who hasn't had a wish of her own yet? Think back." It was true. Jane had had the half-fire, and Martha had made Carrie half-talk, and Mark had taken them to half of a desert island. Jane had to agree that Katherine deserved a chance, but she couldn't keep from giving advice. "We don't want any old visits with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow," she said. "Make it something that's fun for everybody." "I'm going to," said Katherine, "but I can't decide between wishing we could all fly like birds and wishing we had all the money in the world." "Those aren't any good," said Jane. "People always wish those in stories, and it never works out at all. They either fly too near the sun and get burned, or else end up crushed under all the money." "We could make it paper money," suggested Katherine. A discussion followed as to how many $1 million in large bills it would take to crush a person to death. By the time the 4 children got back to the subject of the magic charm, 17 valuable minutes had been wasted. But now Mark had an idea. "We've found out the charm could take us through space," he said. "What about time?" "You mean travel around in the past?" Jane's eyes were glowing. "See Captain Kidd and Nero?" "I've always wanted to live back in the olden romantic days," said Katherine, getting excited too. "In days of old when knights were bold." The others were joining in by now. For once, the 4 children were all in complete agreement. Put in about tournaments," said Mark. "And quests," said Jane. "Put in a good deed too," said Martha, "just to be on the safe side." "Don't forget to say 2 times everything," said all 3. They clustered eagerly around Katherine as she took hold of the charm. "I wish," said Katherine, "that we may go back twice as far as to the days of King Arthur and see 2 tournaments and go on 2 quests and do 2 good deeds." The next thing the 4 children knew, they were standing in the midst of a crowded highway. 4 queens were just passing, riding under a silken canopy. The next moment, 7 merry milkmaids skipped past, going a-maying. In the distance, a gallant knight was chasing a grimly giant with puissant valor, and in the other direction, a grimly giant was chasing a gallant knight for all he was worth. Some pilgrims stopped and asked the 4 children the way to Canterbury. The 4 children didn't know. But by now, they were tired of the crowded traffic conditions on the King's Highway and crossed into a field where the grass seemed greener and fresher than any they had ever seen in their own time. A tall figure lay on the ground nearby, under an apple tree. It was a knight in full armor, and he was sound asleep. The 4 children knew he was asleep because Martha lifted the visor of his helmet and peeked inside. A gentle snore issued forth. The knight's sword lay on the ground beside him, and Mark reached to pick it up. Immediately, the sleeping knight awoke and sat up. "Who steals my purse steals trash," he said, "but who steals my sword steals honor itself, and him will I harry by wood and by water till I cleave him from his brain pan to his thigh bone." "I beg your pardon, sir," said Mark. "We didn't mean anything," said Jane. "We're sorry," said Katherine. The knight rubbed his eyes with his mailed fist. Instead of the miscreant thief he had expected to see, he saw Mark and Jane and Katherine and Martha. "Who be you?" he said. "Hath some grimly foe murdered me in my sleep? Am I in heaven? Be ye cherubim or seraphim?" "We be neither," said Katherine, "and this isn't heaven. We are 4 children." "Pish," said the knight. "Ye be like no children these eyes have ever beheld. Your garb is outlandish." "People who live in tin armor shouldn't make remarks," said Katherine. At this moment there was an interruption. A lady came riding up on a milk-white palfrey. She seemed considerably excited. "Hist, gallant knight!" she cried. The knight rose to his feet and bowed politely. The lady began batting her eyes and looking at him in a way that made the children feel ashamed for her. "Thank heaven I found you," she went on. "You alone of all the world can help me, if your name be Sir Launcelot, and I am let to know it is." The children stared at the knight, open-mouthed with awe. "Are you really Sir Launcelot?" Mark asked him. "That is my name," said the knight. The 4 children stared at him harder. Now that he wasn't looking so sleepy, they could see that it was true. No other in all the world could wear so manly a bearing, so noble a face. They were in the presence of Sir Launcelot du Lac, the greatest knight in all the age of chivalry. "How is Elaine?" Katherine wanted to know right away. "And little Galahad?" "I know not the folk you mention," said Sir Launcelot. "Oh, yes, you do. Sooner or later," said Katherine. "You probably just haven't come to them yet." "Be ye a prophetess?" cried Sir Launcelot, becoming interested. "Can ye read the future? Tell me more." But the lady on the milk-white palfrey was proving impatient. "Away, poppets," she said, getting between the 4 children and Sir Launcelot. "Gallant knight, I crave your assistance. In a dolorous tower nearby, a dread ogre is distressing some gentlewoman. I am preceptress of the Distressed Gentlewoman Society. We need your help." "Naturally," said Sir Launcelot. He whistled, and his trusty horse appeared from behind the apple tree, where it had been cropping apples. Sir Launcelot started to mount the horse. The 4 children looked at each other. They did not like what they had seen of the lady at all, and they liked the way she had spoken to them even less. Katherine stepped forward. "I wouldn't go if I were you," she said. "It's probably a trap." The lady gave her an evil look. "Even so," said Sir Launcelot, "needs must when duty calls." He adjusted his reins. Katherine drew herself up to her full 4 feet 4. "As you noticed before, I be a mighty prophetess," she cried, "and I say unto you, go not where this lady bids. She will bring you nothing but disaster." "I shall go where I please," said Sir Launcelot. "So there," said the lady. "You'll be sorry," said Katherine. "Enough of parley," said Sir Launcelot. "Never yet did Launcelot turn from a worthy quest. I know who ye be now. Ye be 4 false wizards come to me in the guise of children to tempt me from my course. 'Tis vain. Out of the way. Flee, churls. Avaunt and quit my sight. Thy bones are marrowless. Giddy up." Sir Launcelot chirruped to his horse, and the lady chirruped to hers, and away they went, galloping down the King's Highway. The 4 children had to scatter to both sides to avoid the flying hooves. Of course, it was but the work of a moment and a simple problem in fractions for Katherine to wish they all had horses and could follow. Immediately they had, and they did. Sir Launcelot turned and saw the 4 children close at his heels, mounted now on 4 dashing chargers. "Away, fiends," he said. "Shan't," said Katherine. They went on. The 4 children had never ridden horseback before, but they found that it came to them quite easily, though Martha's horse was a bit big for her, and she had trouble posting. It was particularly interesting when, every time the lady started casting loving looks at Sir Launcelot, the children would ride up close behind and make jeering noises, and Sir Launcelot would turn in his saddle and shout, "Begone, demons!" at them. This happened every few minutes. Sir Launcelot seemed to get a little bit angrier each time. When they had ridden a goodly pace, they came to a dark wood, stretching along both sides of the highway. Just at the edge of the wood, the lady cried out that her horse had cast a shoe. Sir Launcelot reined in to go to her aid. The 4 children stopped at a safe distance. Then, just as Sir Launcelot was dismounting, 3 knights rode out of the wood. One was dressed all in red, one in green, and one in black. Before the children could cry out, the knights rushed at Sir Launcelot from behind. It was 3 against 1 and most unfair. But even so, Sir Launcelot's strength would have been as the strength of at least 9 if he hadn't been taken by surprise. As it was, he had no time even to touch his hand to his sword before the 3 knights had seized and disarmed him, bound him hand and foot, flung him across the saddle of his own horse, and galloped off into the wood with him, a hapless prisoner. The lady turned on the 4 children. "Ha ha!" she cried. "Now they will take him to my castle, where he will lie in a deep dungeon and be beaten every day with thorns. And so we shall serve all knights of the Round Table who happen this way. Death to King Arthur!" "Why, you false thing, you," said Jane. "I told him so," said Katherine. "Let's go home," said Martha. "No, we have to rescue him," said Mark. "Ho-ho!" said the lady. "Just you try it. Your magic is a mere nothing compared with mine, elf spawn. Know that I am the great enchantress Morgan Le Fay." "You would be," said Katherine, who didn't like being called elf spawn, as who would. "I remember you in the books, always making trouble. I wish you'd go jump in the lake." Katherine was not thinking of the charm when she wished this, or she might have worded it differently. But that didn't stop the charm. "Good old charm," said Mark as he watched what happened. Morgan Le Fay didn't go jump in the lake. She merely fell in a pool. Luckily, there was a pool handy. She slid backwards off of her horse and landed in it in a sitting position. And luckier still, the pool had a muddy bottom, and Morgan Le Fay stuck there long enough for Katherine to make another calmer wish, which was that she would stay stuck and unable to use any of her magic for twice as long as would be necessary. This done, the 4 children turned their horses into the wood and set about following the wicked knights. Morgan Le Fay hurled a few curses after them from among the water weeds, but these soon died away in the distance. There was no path to follow through the wood. The branches of trees hung low and thick, and the earth beneath them was damp and dark and dank, and no birds sang. "This," said Katherine, "is what I would call a tugly wood." "Don't!" cried Martha. "Suppose something came whiffling through it." The 4 children pressed on. Suddenly they came to a clearing, and there, amidst a tangle of lambkill and henbane and deadly nightshade, they saw the witch's castle rising just ahead of them. Poison ivy mantled its walls. There were snakes in the moat and bats in the belfry. The 4 children did not like the look of it at all. "What do we do now?" said Jane. "Wish him free, of course," said Mark. "Just stand out here and wish? That's too easy," said Katherine. "Well, I'm not going inside that castle," said Martha. "Nay," said Katherine, who did not seem to be so docile today as she used to be. "Ye forget that I be a mighty prophetess. Trust ye unto my clever strategy." "Bourgeois," said Mark. "Less talk and more action." Katherine put her hand on the charm. "I wish that 2 doors of this castle may stand open for us," she said. So then the children had to look for the one door that did. They found it at last, a little back door with a small drawbridge of its own over the moat. The drawbridge was down and the door was ajar. The children went over the drawbridge. "Beware, beware," croaked the magic talking frogs in the moat. They went in through the doorway. A long, dark passage lay beyond. "Beware, beware," squeaked the magic talking mice in the walls. The children went along the passage. It wound and twisted a good deal. The magic cobwebs hanging from the ceiling brushed at their faces and caught at their clothing, trying to hold them back, but they broke away and pushed on. At last the passage ended at a heavy doorway. From beyond it came the sound of loud voices raised in something that was probably intended to be music. The children eased the door open a crack and peeked through into a large hall. The Red Knight and the Green Knight and the Black Knight were enjoying a hearty meal and washing down each mouthful with a draught of nut-brown ale. They were singing at the table, which was rude of them, and the words of their song were ruder still. Speak roughly to our Launcelot, and beat him with the briar, and kick him in the pants a lot, on this we never tire. We've put him in a dungeon cell, and there we'll beat him very well. Clink, cannikin, clink. I just made that up. The four children looked at each other indignantly, then they peeked through again. Some varlets had appeared in the hall. They cleared away the dishes, left the dessert platter on the table, and departed. The dessert was a number of round plum puddings, all aflame with blazing blue brandy. The Black Knight stood up to serve them. At that moment, Katherine remembered a story she had once read. She decided to have some fun with the three knights. "I wish 2 of those puddings were stuck to the end of your nose," she cried, putting her hand on the charm and staring straight at the Black Knight through the crack of the doorway. And immediately, one of them was. But this pudding, unlike the one in the story, was still burning blue with brandy fire, so that not only was it humiliating to the Black Knight, but it hurt a good deal as well. And furthermore, his long black whiskers, of which he was inordinately proud, began to singe badly. He gave a wild howl, and his face turned nearly as black as his garments, with rage. "Odds blood, who hath played the scurvy trick upon me?" he cried, beating at his nose and whiskers with his hands, and then yelling with pain as the flames scorched his fingers. "Tee-hee-hee-hee," tittered the Green Knight. "You look very funny." The Black Knight whirled on him. "Be it you, then, who hath played the scurvy trick?" he cried. No, it be not I," said the Green Knight, "but you do look very funny just the same." "Oh, I do I?" shouted the Black Knight in a passion, and he whipped his sword out of its scabbard and swapped off the Green Knight's head. The Red Knight jumped to his feet. "I say, Albemarle, that was going a bit far," he cried. "Oh, I don't know," cried the Black Knight. "He was exceedingly provoking. Come and help me get this great pudding thing off my nose." "Well," said the Red Knight, looking at him rather dubiously, "I don't know if I can, but I'll try." And he whipped his sword out of its scabbard and swapped off the pudding from the Black Knight's nose. Unfortunately for him, he swapped off a good bit of the nose, too. The Black Knight gave a wild bellow and hurled himself at the Red Knight, sword in hand. The Red Knight parried his thrust. A moment later, they were joined in deadly combat, leaping about the hall, smashing furniture, and hacking off parts of each other with the greatest abandon. Behind the door, the four children shut their eyes, held their ears, and cowered trembling in each other's arms. The combat did not last long. 2 sword blades flashed in the air, and a second later 2 heads fell on the floor, followed more slowly by 2 bodies. There was a silence. Katherine had not meant her wish to end in such a gory and final way, but she reminded herself to be bloody, bold, and resolute, and crept through the door into the hall, followed by 3 others. All 4 averted their eyes from what they would have seen if they had looked at the floor. "I do think you might have managed it neater," said Jane. "How can we get through to the dungeon with all these different pieces of night lying around underfoot?" "The point is, I managed it at all," said Katherine, more cheerfully than she felt. "And we don't have to walk. We could wish ourselves there." She put her hand on the charm and wished they were twice as far as the dungeon door, and that she had 2 keys to the dungeon in her hand. After that, of course, it was but a matter of turning the key, and out walked Sir Launcelot, followed by several dozen other knights who had also been prisoners of the enchantress and her friends, and who looked somewhat the worse for their daily beatings. The other captive knights fell on their knees, kissing the children's hands and hailing them as deliverers. Sir Launcelot also thanked the children quite politely, but somehow he didn't seem so happy to be free as the children had expected he would. A moment later, when the other captive knights had left to resume their interrupted quests, the children found out why. "You saved me by magical means?" Sir Launcelot asked. "That's right," said Katherine proudly. "I did it with my little charm." "That mislikes me much," said Sir Launcelot. "I wish it were otherwise." "Well, really," said Katherine, "I suppose you'd rather have stayed in there being beaten?" "Sooner that," said Sir Launcelot, "than bring shame to my honor by taking unfair magical advantage of a foe, however deadly." "Well, if you're all that particular," said Katherine, annoyed, "I can easily put them back together again." And she led him into the great hall and showed him the different pieces of the 3 knights. "Please do so," said Sir Launcelot. "Shall I lock you up in the dungeon again?" asked Katherine sarcastically. "Doesn't it hurt your conscience that I set you free?" "That much advantage," said Sir Launcelot, "I think I can take. Some fair jailer's daughter would probably have let me out sooner or later anyway. Oh, is that so? Said Katherine. I'm sorry I troubled, I'm sure. Is there anything else? Well, yes, said Sir Launcelot. You might just fetch me my sword and armor, which these cowardly knaves have taken from me. Thoroughly cross with him by now, Katherine wished the sword and armor back on him. Then, working the fractions more carefully, she spoke the wish that was to bring the Red Knight, the Green Knight, and the Black Knight back to life. It was very interesting watching the different pieces of the different colored knights reassembling themselves on the hall floor, and the four children were sorry when it was over. But by then, something even more interesting was going on, because by then Sir Launcelot was fighting the three knights single-handed, and that was a sight worth coming back many centuries to see. Sir Launcelot did not seem to appreciate the four children's interest, however. Go away. Thank you very much. Goodbye, he called, pinning the Green Knight against the wall with a table and holding the red and black ones at bay with his sword. Can't we help? Mark asked. No, go away, said Sir Launcelot, cracking the Red Knight on the pate, thwacking the Black Knight in the chest with his backhand swing, and leaping over the table to take a whack at the green one. Can't we even watch? Wailed Jane. Nope, makes me nervous. I want to be alone, said Sir Launcelot, ducking under the table to send the Red Knight sprawling, then turning to face the black and green ones again. Katherine sighed and made a wish. Next moment, the four children were on their horses once more, riding along the King's Highway. We might at least have waited in the yard, complained Martha. Now we'll never know how it ended. He'll come out on top. Trust him, said Katherine. I do get tired of people who are always right all the time. Anyway, we'll be seeing him again, I imagine, at the tournament. Oh, gee, yes, the tournament. I was forgetting, said Mark. When do you suppose it'll be? Not for weeks, maybe, by the time here, said Katherine. But for us, a mere wish on the charm. And she merely wished. And we're going to stop there, and we will finish up the rest of this chapter next time. So join me again for the rest of chapter 3, and we'll find out what happened at the tournament.